All right, I think we're now live, Simon. I want to welcome everybody to our weekly Conversations with Commodores. We've been doing this for several months now. I want to say 26 or 27 weeks we've been doing this. And what we do each Thursday night, you guys know, is we try to bring on former players, coaches, cheerleaders, anybody who's reporting on the program. And that's what's led us to today. We've got Simon Gibbs, who is the current, are you the sports editor of the Vanderbilt Hustler?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and we talked with your predecessor, Max, a few months back. And as you and I talked a few minutes ago, our conversation that we're going to have tonight is going to be vastly different than the one that Max and I had a few months ago. But I appreciate you making some time. I know you've just gotten back onto campus this week or back into town and maybe getting settled in with classes and stuff. And we're going to get into that too. But Simon, if you will, tell the people a little bit about your experience with the Hustler. You know, what positions have you held? Have you held other positions with other papers or maybe radio stations? Just tell us about your journalism career a little bit and your background. Where are you from?
Great. So to start, I am from New York, and funny enough, you may know by now, not only is Max Schneider my predecessor from New York, but Max's predecessor, Cutler Klein, is also from New York. So we are running now 3 sports editors deep from New York.
Yeah, we're seeing a trend.
A bit. Outside of, so I've been writing for the Hustler since literally the day I arrived on campus. I think my first article was published in my first week on campus. And I previously held the titles of staff writer my freshman year, senior writer my sophomore year, deputy sports editor my junior year, and now sports editor. So there was a few ranks to climb up there. In addition to my work with the Hustler, I host Vanderbilt sports talk shows on both Vanderbilt Television. I guess they've rebranded now. It used to be Vanderbilt Television. It's now Vanderbilt Video Productions, and VandyRadio. So we have a podcast and a TV show that I host with the other senior sports writers on staff of the Hustler. And aside from my Hustler coverage, last year I held an internship, which I plan to return to second semester this year, with the Nashville Predators, writing for NHL.com.
Excellent. Well, I know the Predators have a huge following. They've had a lot of success, and their fan base seems to be growing every year. So I bet that's exciting too.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Excellent. Now, are you a senior? Will you graduate in the spring?
Yeah, so I am a senior now, and I guess we'll get into this. I don't know entirely how much my senior year will be spent in person, virtually, where I'll be, what I'll be doing, but the goal is to graduate in the spring, which I know Vanderbilt, whether they move it online or not, will make possible for me.
Well, that's why we're talking about that before we head into the sports and football in the fall. Let's talk about, you're a senior. This is, I'm sure your family, your parents are probably hoping also that it's your senior year, that you graduate in the spring. I know all parents want their children to get out of school and get on to other things at times. But how long have you been back in Nashville? I know you live in the Green Hills area. You don't live on campus, but take us through from it's so different from really past generations where most of us lived in or near campus, and you walked, across the street back to campus. But tell us a little bit about your situation.
So nowadays, it's very common for students to live off campus. Now, it's always been common for seniors to live off campus because seniors have always been given that right, to apply to live off campus. Juniors, however, have not always been allowed to live off campus. So it's typically just seniors. However, last year, because of the shortage in dorms due to knocking down one of the Carmichael Towers, they allowed juniors to apply to live off campus. So until last year, it was almost entirely seniors living off campus. Then last year, it was seniors and some juniors. But this year, because of COVID, they said all seniors are off campus, all juniors are off campus, and we're going to give sophomores the option to apply to live off campus. So like, with the exception of a few on-campus positions, like I have friends who are RAs, I have friends who need to be on campus and therefore are in dorms. Most everyone I know is living off campus, and my friends and I figured, our thought process was we have a couple cars between the 6 of us. So we could, transport people back and forth from campus. But we figured if classes go virtual, we'd like to have the option to stay in Nashville, and we'd also like to have the option to stay away from campus because it could be a little bit hectic. So that was very much on purpose, us, finding a place to live that's a 5 or 8 minute drive away from campus.
Oh, that's smart planning by you guys. How long have you been back in town, or have you been in town most of the summer?
So I've been in town for almost 2 weeks now. I had an internship this summer. This past summer, I was supposed to be working in Bristol, Connecticut for ESPN, but due to COVID, my internship was pushed virtually. So I worked via, a laptop they rented out to me for ESPN. So basically, I was allowed to do it anywhere I wanted. So I worked from home for the first 5 weeks. It was also shortened from 10 to 6 weeks. I worked the first 5 weeks from home, then came down to Nashville, got situated, did my last week down here. And that pretty much brings me into this week where I haven't been working for ESPN, but I have been doing some hustler work before classes start.
Gotcha. Now, when do classes begin?
Monday. Originally, it was supposed to be Wednesday. They normally give sort of a Monday and Tuesday transition for students. But again, their goal is to come Thanksgiving break, send everyone home, and that's it. No coming back afterwards. They're going to take finals from home. So they gave us these 2 extra days of classes, Monday and Tuesday, to sort of, I guess, buy back a few of those days we lose from Thanksgiving.
And to your knowledge, are there any in-person classes, or is everything offline? I mean, online, or
So compared to most other campuses, it seems like we have a good amount of in-person. And I say a good amount, meaning, this is just spitballing. My guess is that 30% of classes are in person.
Right.
And that's good. You've got schools that are almost 100%, and like you'd be lucky to have one in person.
Yeah.
I know that originally there were more that were in person, but as they continued planning, they realized it was either not plausible to have that many in person, or, from my understanding, again, I believe they gave the professors the option, and how could you not? So some professors are opting to have their classes be held virtually. But yeah, I think the goal is to get as many of those in-person classes as possible. But I also know of some classes that are hybrid classes, and they are basically, because of sheer size, they'll say, this half of the alphabet come on Monday and do online Wednesday. They're trying everything in their power to make sure you have some in-person experience, which I do appreciate, but not entirely sure how long it'll last.
Yeah, they gotta justify having kids on campus,
right,
as much as they charge. But if we've learned anything, and it goes with people who are in school or adults or anything in life, right now it is such a fluid world that you really have got to be able to pivot when you can. Now, let's move over to your day job, so to speak. Typically at this time of the year, you're 100% focused on football, I assume, cranking out articles. The Hustler does such a wonderful job of covering the team. I'm sure to a certain extent, I've read some of your writings this week, you're still doing that, but you're probably doing it in a much different fashion than historically. So share with us, how are you able to do your job but still follow whatever the protocols the football department is putting out for its press?
Yeah. So the way it typically works is, by now I would have attended practices. By now I would have attended not multiple. There have been press conferences. If this was normal, we would be having press conferences all summer. However, it's not. And they didn't officially start practice until Monday. Before then, it was only walkthroughs and workouts. They couldn't put on the pads. So they started on Monday. So until Monday, it was very sporadic. Our coverage was, find a special feature or work on a column, do some video analysis, but nothing crazy until Monday, which was the first press conference. And we sort of learned of how things are going to go this year. Now, for starters, they're not letting media into practice. However, that may change in the coming days. They have a balcony that looks over the practice field, and they're trying to find a way to get us to be able to go to practice and watch from the balcony. However, it would not necessarily surprise me if they didn't, because believe it or not, last year, they actually never let media into practice. And that was because of the quarterback competition. They didn't want it spoiled. And frankly, Vanderbilt finds himself in the same boat this year with the quarterback competition. Right. Four guys this year. So if they're going to be as confidential as they were last year, I'm not sure if we'll be allowed to go to practice. Maybe we'll get to see the end or the beginning or something. But that's what the practice viewing is like right now. As for press conferences, frankly, the frequency at which they hold press conferences is not quite as frequent as it has been in years past, which is frustrating, but understandable. They've had Monday, we had a Derek Mason press conference, media availability conducted via Zoom. So they gave us a Zoom link. Alan George, who's the assistant athletic director for communication, sort of moderated it. And when you had a question, he would unmute you and have you ask. Then Wednesday.
Pause you for just a second with that. So frankly, you could be in Franklin, Tennessee or home in New York and still do your job for that extent. But and I guess this goes without saying that there's nothing in person right now. You have no ability to go over to McGugin to do any part of your job at this point.
Correct.
At least from an interview standpoint.
Correct. I'm planning on going to McGugin in the coming days to see if I could find a vantage point to see practice from, because I'm not allowed into the facility. But that's correct. I could basically, until games start and the media is attending in person, I could really do this job from home.
How good are your drone skills?
If student media provided me with a drone, I'd be all over the field.
Oh, I think that'd be a fabulous from a marketing standpoint, but then again, maybe it's giving away too many.
I was going to say, I can't imagine the coaches would be happy with a camera drone flying over the field.
I wonder if they use it at all. But anyway, that's kind of getting off my point. But I bet you some schools have figured out how to use it to their advantage from a spacing standpoint. That bird's eye view shows everything. But you were going on, you said Monday you had the Coach Mason interview or press conference. But you were say, did you do something yesterday by way of a press conference?
Yes. Wednesday was Mason and Todd Fitch, who's the new first-year offensive coordinator. Day off today. Then Friday, we have Mason and Ted Roof, who's the new defensive coordinator. And then next week, from my understanding, the plan is to proceed with more normalcy as it pertains to press conference, maybe more frequent, but also this week, student athletes were not made available to media.
I was just going to ask you, what is Coach Mason's policy about making the ball players available?
So in years past, it's been, on a case-by-case basis. When they do press conferences during the regular season, they have Mason go in for a shift, then they have 3 players go in for a shift, normally the top guys. None of that this year, but in addition to that, we always had the option to do exclusive interviews in practice or, before or after practice or over the phone, whatever it is, to get content for feature articles. But I can't conduct those interviews yet because players aren't available until next week. So the hope is that next week we'll be able to do those longer interviews with the student athletes.
And do you think that that's really COVID related? I mean, is that what's setting all this, or this is just a change in Coach Mason's approach to the press?
So I can't imagine it's COVID related, because if we're doing press conferences via Zoom, I don't see why we can't do player interviews via Zoom or phone call. Frankly, I'm not sure I understand. And I do know that student athletes are available at most other schools. However, that's not to say, it's not understandable. They did just start practice on Monday. And the other thing is, I'm also not entirely sure if that would be a Coach Mason policy or an athletics communications policy. That could be coming from his higher ups.
I'm thinking not many schools have 4 quarterbacks competing for QB1. And I suspect that if you were able to talk to any of those guys right now, regardless of how guarded they are, it's going to create a problem eventually that the coach just doesn't want.
Yeah.
Let's pivot to the athletic communications department. We've all read of all of the widespread changes that have occurred this summer and that are still occurring coming up through the 1st of September. But I also saw that there were either some new hires or people brought back that was announced. And I'd like you to kind of shed a little bit of information of what's going on there, because most of us who aren't in your position and don't follow the program nearly as closely, we need to know a little bit more than we know.
Yeah. So I actually wrote an article on the shakeup for the Hustler. So if anyone wants to read an in-depth where I interviewed some of the former employees, definitely take a look at that on the Hustler website. Basically, from my understanding, and having interviewed former employees, the way it happened was one day they were invited to Zoom calls. They weren't told why. They weren't told what the subject was. The subject was just like catching up or something along those lines. I wouldn't quote me on that. And they were told in those meetings via Zoom that their positions were being terminated. Not that they were being laid off, not that they were being fired, but their positions were being terminated because the goal was to take this athletics communications department and move it
traditionally is physically housed where?
In Magoogan, and it will continue to be physically housed in Magoogan. So that includes SIDs, sports information directors. There's one for each sport, and these are the people who do every press conference, coordinate every press conference, coordinate every interview, TV interviews, radio interviews, what have you. They have really busy jobs making sure the student athletes can be available to the media. So that includes all the SIDs, all the creatives, video content, Twitter and Instagram, all the people that create that are in the athletics communications branch. And that covers most of the communications branch. I want to guess it was probably 8 to 12 employees before the shift. And that's bigger at every other SEC school. It's more than 8 to 12. But anyways, they wanted to take the staff and move it as a subset of university communications. Now, of course, people are skeptical and people are quick to jump to conclusions. I can't tell you with certainty that they're downsizing. That's what people are saying. They're downsizing, they're cutting costs, they're doing this, they're doing that. That's a broad sweeping assumption that we don't know, right? Because Vanderbilt told me that the goal is to rebuild the exact same department, exact same structure, same functions, and it's still going to be housed in Magoogan, just as a subset of university comms. Now, why? I don't know. Will it be the same size? I also don't know. But I'm telling you that they're claiming to be rebuilding the same thing. So the question for those skeptics is why are you so certain? You know what I'm saying? Because there have been times, of course, when maybe they were trying to cut costs, and maybe they will only hire, half the staff or half the numbers they had before. But we can't say that with certainty yet because they haven't filled out the rest of the staff. As you mentioned, they did bring in 2 new hires. They brought in sports information directors, one previously from Duke, and I forget where the other one was from. But 2 sports information directors, one for football and one for baseball, obviously 2 of the biggest sports for coverage at Vanderbilt.
And one of them, not to mention or not to forget, that is the defending national champions in a major sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found it funny that they hired the baseball SID was previously one of the Duke athletics SID. And if you'll remember, Kumar Rocker threw his 19 strikeout no-hitter against Duke when I presume this guy was still there. So funny to jump ship.
Let me throw this to you, and I suspect you're going to say I really don't know, but I have to ask. If they're doing this shuffle, I'll call it, are the people who are at Kirkland, and I know that's the way I've always heard them referred to in the articles and the interviews, are these people who are going to be taking some of these positions for the people who've been let go, are they physically going to come over to Magoogan to do their jobs?
Yes. So when I say, again, this is why it doesn't make much sense to me, because the department and where they're working and who they're working for doesn't change. They're still in Magoogan. They're still working directly for Alan George, who's the assistant athletic director for communications. Yet the department is I don't think housed is the right term, but is included in university communications, right? It's not the athletics communications department. It's part of university communications.
I think I understand that part, but I'm envisioning hostility everywhere.
Yeah.
If I'm originally across campus in Kirkland and I'm coming in to take over X job,
Yeah.
there are still people working who remained, and I know a
Right.
few remained. That just does not make a lot of sense.
Right. So you're absolutely correct. However, I do know that, or I do think that most of those people that are going to be coming in, the new people, are not coming from Kirkland necessarily. They're hiring SIDs from other schools, right? So my assumption would be that they'd be new staffers, but I absolutely agree. And I think there's got to be some points of contention. One thing that I brought up in my article that one of the former employees told me in our interview is that athletics communications in the past hasn't really had the greatest relationship with the communication staff in Kirkland Hall, which is a little concerning if they're moving to be a subset technically of Kirkland Hall. And they once one name that's tossed around a lot, and I can't say much about him because I don't know much about him other than he declined or actually he didn't respond to my request for interview. Steve Ertel, who's the vice chancellor for communications at Vanderbilt, um, never really had much contact other than bi-monthly meetings with the athletic communications department just to check in on their work. Often wasn't present at these meetings, and what I was told that was probably most concerning was the athletic communications department, I believe it was in the fall or maybe of spring of last year, scheduled a meeting with Steve Ertel in Kirkland Hall, physically in Kirkland Hall, to discuss what they do, how they can improve, what their goals are, etc. And also just to introduce themselves because they hadn't met him face to face. This was a 30-minute block scheduled in Kirkland Hall, and the entire athletics communications department walked all the way to Kirkland only for Steve Ertel to show up 27 minutes late. There were 3 minutes left in the interview or in the meeting. And that was a story that I included in story that I included in my report for the Hustler that to me was a little concerning. And of course, again, I don't know much about Steve Ertel, but the pictures painted of him are not great.
Has anyone on your staff at the Hustler, whether it's sports or other departments, been granted any time with the new chancellor to talk about changes on campus and more particularly, obviously, about sports?
So one thing I will say is that the new Chancellor Diermeyer, is opening his door to us more than it has been in the past couple years, right? 5, 6, 7+ years ago, the highest of high up people at Vanderbilt University were an open book with the Hustler. That changed in the past 3 years. I don't know why, but Daniel Diermeyer seems to be setting a good precedent with the Hustler. And I know he's going to grant, as of now, 2 meetings a semester with Hustler editors to discuss whatever it is, Q&As almost. And I know our editor-in-chief, Emmanuel John Milton, is going to be undertaking one of those in, I think, September. And the goal is to get me in for the next one in November to have a specific conversation with him about athletics.
Well, I wish you guys could flip and let you have a seat in September.
I told him the same.
Well, Simon, I want to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about our new AD. Candace, I was very encouraged with what I read, but again, I don't follow the program as closely as a lot of people in our group, and certainly not as closely as what you do professionally. But I was encouraged that the National Commodore Club is physically moving back over.
Yeah.
And how much of an impression has that made on you and others who follow the program?
Well, it's not just that. I think that is huge. And the fact that she did it almost like with the snap of a finger, right? She was hired not too long ago amidst a global pandemic, or her interim tag was taken off not too long ago.
Yeah, she went straight from, I mean, running. There was no
Yeah.
walking, there was no crawling. It was
Yeah.
you're
So the way I see it is Candace is absolutely like the right woman for the job. Perhaps no one better than I mean, after seeing the shakeup with Malcolm Turner, which frankly I don't know too many details. I've heard reports, but I don't want to speak on speculation. After seeing how that ended, it's very clear we need someone who knows the school inside and out. And no one knows it more than Candace, who played here as a student athlete, has 3 Vanderbilt degrees, has worked in the Vanderbilt athletic department for 18 or 20 years. And she knows the staff from top to bottom. She knows the administration from top to bottom. And she also knows how to put these initiatives in place quickly that will build for the future. Another thing to me that is super small, but absolutely vital is the Black and Gold Club, I believe she's calling it, where she's opening her door to former student athletes and alumni, right? That's not something that's always been the case in the past. Sometimes, from my understanding, and you would be able to speak to this better than I, but from what I'm hearing, it hasn't always been an open line of communication with former student athletes. And she's going to be very quick to change that. So I think at least when she was brought in full time, I was, very impressed with her and her background, confident for the future. If anything, these past few months have only made me more confident that she's the right person for this job.
when will you get some exclusive time to be able to throw all this and more to her in an interview?
So I actually, again, this sort of speaks to Candace's um, personability as well. The day her interim tag was removed, she spent probably the whole day doing various interviews and publishing various things for Vanderbilt's website and whatnot. And she still took 20 minutes of her time that day to take an interview with me. It was not necessary. It was in the middle of the pandemic again, but she still found it necessary to do so. So her
Simon,
being,
I want to interrupt you very quickly and tell you, I think it was very necessary for her to speak with you that day.
that's a good way to put it.
You're the absolute voice from the school's established newspaper. How else, if she doesn't do it then or quickly after the interim tag takes off, your article and the tone is a lot different than it probably was when you did get to speak to her.
You're absolutely correct. And again, I'm sort of saying unnecessary is because of the atmosphere that's been created in the past few years, where a lot of senior administrators at Vanderbilt are not always available to the Hustler, and they don't really prioritize us. So I do see what you're saying, and I do agree. However, that was on the shorter side, and the questions were very baseline because it was her first day. But the plan is at some point later this semester, I will submit a request for another interview or 2 with her. I'd like to do one in print, and I'd like to do one via podcast. We have our weekly Hustler podcast.
That would be strong.
Yeah. So
I will tell you, I know there are a few other similar dedicated groups on Facebook like this to Vanderbilt sports. But mine just happens to be the newest one, and I just happen to do this on Thursday nights during this calendar year so far. And I've got many more former players and coaches lined up, but I'm really hoping to get her to come on this program, because where else are you going to have a direct audience of former players, former coaches, cheerleaders, integral parts of the sport of the football program, to be able to share what her vision is and to
yeah,
answer direct questions. I think that that's very important, like you said.
absolutely.
And I mean, I am encouraged by the Black and Gold Club. I haven't looked too much into it, but I know historically many of my teammates and for many other years historically have been very discouraged about the lack of communication, or frankly, Simon, just being told no. We're
Yeah,
not going to give you an audience. And these are people who want to lend their name, financial, money, as well as whatever audience is, just to help push the program forward.
yeah. So I definitely, again, I see that changing in the coming years, and I think Candace is absolutely going to be, on the forefront of changing that culture with former student athletes.
How much, now I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball, and you've got 10 months, 9 months on campus, or as part of as being an undergraduate. And I'm not sure when your last official duties will be with the Hustler, but this time next year, do you think that in this calendar year, now granted, we've never been in a pandemic, so who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah.
Do you think that she's going to be given a chance to assert and implement her vision, what she sees going forward?
I think we're actually going to find out about her vision and what she'll be able to accomplish sooner than a year from now. And I say that because you may have seen that I believe it was March or February, they released the strategic plan, which didn't really have much content in it. But in the strategic plan, they said soon, and I'm sure this was delayed by COVID,
Sure.
soon we are going to release a master facilities plan. And the master facilities plan is supposedly going to be the future of Vanderbilt athletics. This is what it's going to look like moving forward. This is what we're going to seek to change. And my guess would be that potentially football, either renovating, rebuilding, whatever it is, might be included in that plan. That would be my hope. But I think that plan will inform us because perhaps if she's not able to include football in that, it might be a little discouraging, and it might tell us that maybe she doesn't have the support that we think she has. But again, these things take time, although the master's facilities plan will be very telling.
Has there been any discussion of it related with her current news in the last couple of weeks? To your knowledge, have you seen anything or heard anything?
No. So no, I have not. And that's because obviously it's been kept under wraps. What I did hear is that there were very, very preliminary, and I heard this from a source who I know would rather go unnamed, that there was a plan at some point to make, and I say small, they were significant in terms of financially and in terms of optics, but in the grand scheme, not necessarily the biggest renovations. There were plans brought up in the Malcolm Turner era to make some renovations toward the football stadium. Of course, that didn't end up coming to fruition. But with Candace Story Lee, hopefully those renovations or that same idea, whatever the idea that Malcolm Turner had started to develop, can be included in her facilities plan.
Well, I certainly, with 30 plus years of experience with the sports program and having played in the late 80s, it's too easy to be discouraged and just say, it is what it is, and it's the way it's always been, and it's going to be. And we've had years where I can't give you the quotes, but since the Bobby Johnson era, we've been to several bowl games, which is great. But then we've kind of reversed at times. But let me ask your thoughts about the transfer portal. Let's kind of pivot a little bit. You've got one philosophy that it's great that these guys, if they have aspirations to play on the next level or they want to continue because they're going to be a grad year, to go play somewhere, somewhere else. But you've got old school people saying, well, you're just too much of a spoil sport. You couldn't beat out the other guy. And now you're, this is your way out. And I think it's a generational thing. I really do. But, and Vanderbilt is not immune to it. We've had guys transfer in. We've had a lot of guys transfer out. But what are your thoughts about the transfer portal?
So I think the transfer portal is fascinating, right? I think the way we're heading, and my hope would be that at some point in the next 5 years, there's a rule that allows you to, there's a one-time transfer rule, which you may have heard about, which basically says student athletes can transfer once without having to redshirt, because when you transfer, you have to sit out a year. I am very much in favor of that. And then any subsequent transfers, you'd have to then wait out the year. I support transferring, and that's for many reasons. I mean, first and foremost, it may not be that you couldn't beat the guy in front of you. It could very well be that you were almost lied to in the recruiting pitch. You may have been given empty promises by your head coach. And I know this is more common in basketball than football. It is so common for head coaches to pitch a recruit in saying you're going to go in and play 28 minutes a game, and what do you know, they play 2. And I think it's unfair for them to have to stay there, or for them to have to be penalized by sitting out a year after transferring. I think the transfer portal, again, as you mentioned, it's not, it maybe the culture on the transfer portal has changed over time, because it wasn't as common as it, frankly, even 10 years ago, it wasn't as common as it is now.
Oh, no, not even close. But I tell you that one of the most egregious ones that I saw, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but
Yeah.
Clemson quarterback Kelly Bryant left when Golden Boy, what's his name, comes
Trevor
in.
Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence. He comes in, and Bryant goes off to Missouri, and I don't think he really did much at Missouri. I think he got hurt. I don't know if anything ever panned out for him professionally, but I just saw that as, and Lawrence got hurt. I want to say maybe the week after Bryant declared he was transferring. And in D1 football, it's rare not to play multiple quarterbacks in a season, even just for a little bit, even
Right.
the top schools. But here's one I want to ask you. I don't know if you know about this, if the specifics, but how I saw that Tua's brother, Talia, who transferred to Maryland, he was immediately made eligible. Do you know why or what that was about?
So yes, before I get to that, one thing I will say is for every Kelly Bryant, there's a Joe Burrow.
Sure, absolutely.
So, but the immediate eligibility is actually interesting. You can apply for this waiver. There are a few conditions that are almost always met, and that's if you transfer for some sort of medical reason, if you transfer for some sort of family reason, or family emergency. Those are almost always met with immediate eligibility waivers. In any other situation, you can apply and you have to provide a reason. I don't know much about the process, but what I do know is that I don't know how closely you followed Vanderbilt basketball in the past few years. We had, for the past 2 seasons, Matt Moyer, a forward who transferred from Syracuse, and he was granted immediate eligibility. From what I learned through the Matt Moyer process, I know that from what I'm hearing, the waiver is most likely to be approved if not only your new head coach is pushing for you, right? Your whatever school you're transferring into is telling the NCAA like he deserves this, but also your former coach. Your former coach has to vouch for you and say, you know, we just didn't have room for him. It's not fair for him to be penalized for this. So I imagine that Tua, with Alabama maybe going in a different direction, had the support of Saban and his staff to say, you know, this just wasn't the place for him.
And the new head coach at not new, but the head coach at Maryland used to coach at Alabama, so I could see that. Well, let's kind of pivot off that. We're going to get to specifics about the season in just a minute, but there were some broad topics I kind of wanted your thoughts about. I want to talk about name, image, and likeness. And it's such a tricky subject. It's, you know, for every Joe Burrow who may be worth X in endorsements and all of that, you've got a third string quarterback who just holds for extra points and field goals. You know, don't laugh. That was me. But what are your thoughts about that? Do you see, is there any talk? Have you heard? And I realize there's a fine line in your position and what you do for the Hustler versus being friends with any of these athletes. I do understand that. Yeah. But I know you're around them enough to get some ideas and have conversation that you may or may not ultimately put into the Hustler.
So name, image, and likeness is particularly interesting at Vanderbilt. One thing I'll say is that in Nashville or in the greater Tennessee area, the talks regarding legislation for name, image, and likeness has really not progressed very far. That's not to say it won't, because we see the pace at which it's proceeding in other states. I can only imagine that Tennessee at some point will have that rapid.
I was going to say, Simon, I know that California passed it this year. And basically it's saying to the NCAA, you've got until 2023 to get your act together, or our laws are now going to take place for our state's student athletes.
So what I will say, and that's absolutely correct, what I will say, and this is why it's so unique to Vanderbilt, is because, you know, some Vanderbilt football players may not be recognizable by the student body, but you know who's recognizable by the student body? That's the baseball players. And not only are the baseball players recognizable, not only can Kumar Rocker and the likes be making plenty of money off of endorsements from, you know, nearby local Nashville companies, but baseball needs this because baseball is given 11.7 scholarships to divide across the whole team.
Not according to Mississippi State fans. It's 8.5 scholarships. You know,
right. By Mississippi State fans' laws, I am also on a baseball scholarship at Vanderbilt.
That's right. Well, congratulations. But you're right. The baseball team they're the rock stars of the campus, and rightfully so. Right now, they're the defending national champs. They've got at least 2 players who are going to be probably in the top 10, if not the top 2, taken next spring, and when they're eligible to be drafted in Leiter and Rocker. But you're right. It may be that some of the students in their same dorm don't even know who some of these guys that or gals who are athletes even play on a program.
Right. And I also only say that because that's the current state of Vanderbilt athletics. If you go back, you know, even 3 or 4 years, if you pick out someone on one of those Vanderbilt bowl teams, if you pick out Kyle Shermer, he's worth as much as Rocker is. That's not because, you know, he's going to go on to the NFL and be a star like Rocker might with the MLB, but he's a significant name in college football, being an SEC quarterback and a successful one at that. So he's worth plenty. And I'm sure, again, a lot of these football players are. So the legislation is important to all sports, but I do think baseball would reign supreme with getting those endorsement deals if and when the law is passed.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I know this is not a conversation you and I can have the answers to tonight in our talk. And I've taken too long to reintroduce. My guest is Simon Gibbs. He's the sports editor of the Vanderbilt Hustler. And we're having just a all over the field conversation, but I knew Simon could handle it. He's very well versed in many things comes to sport. We've got a couple of questions out here that I want to throw to you, because now I want to kind of pivot for the last segment of our talk, Simon, is to talk about football season and what's coming up and the mindset of some of these guys. And before I get to the questions, going into any football season, if you're a football player, I don't care if you're peewee or high school or college or whatever, you have only one thing on your mind getting ready for the season. That can't be the case right now. There's, you know, the pessimist side of me says we're not having college football this season, or we're not going to finish the season.
Yeah,
that's the pessimist. Clearly the optimist and the fan in me wants us to have a complete season, even if we got to run the gauntlet through the entire SEC. But I don't know if you've been around any of the players or gotten a sense of some of the mindsets yet, but I would certainly hope there's not any doubt, because I know these kids want to play. That's why they're there. Obviously to get an education, but they're there right now to get ready for the season. What's your sense of what you may be seeing or hearing from inside the program?
So what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that a lot of players throughout this process haven't always felt heard. And that's because you might see Trevor Lawrence tweet a graphic that says we want to play, and it's signed off from all the conferences. Vanderbilt football players don't want Trevor Lawrence doing the talking for them. When has Trevor Lawrence represented Vanderbilt football? So a lot of these players really have not had their voices heard in a fair way. And that's just the way the NCAA works sometimes. But that being said, them speaking for themselves, I do know that a lot of the players have wanted to play more than ever, right? They want not just to escape from what's going on, but there's going to be a lot of attention on the SEC this year, right? You only have 2 major conferences to follow, or I guess 3, Big 12 as well. So the SEC is going to.
They're not really.
And the ACC outside of Clemson, I mean, Duke and Wake Forest. But anyways, I do think a lot of them want to play. A lot of them are looking and hoping that they can make it through a season. And a lot of these guys need it, right? Because some of them want to make a career out of football. and you've got to prove yourself. And this is an important year. It's as important as any other year. A lot of guys are looking to enter their names in the NFL draft, and if you don't have the resume, it's not there for you.
It'd be tough if you don't have tape this year to
Absolutely.
spring. There's what Vanderbilt's had. Is it 4 thus far? The kicker and 3 others, or am I off?
So here's the interesting thing, right? They've had 5 that are public. The kicker, and we do have another kicker, so it's not the end of the world. The kicker, 3 returning offensive linemen, which is that leaves patchwork at offensive line, and a tight end. Now, what's interesting about that is there's 5 public names, but when we asked Derek Mason on Monday how many players have opted out, he declined to give an answer. I don't know why. I don't know if there's more, but all I know is that he didn't confirm 5 or 6 or 7. So there could be more, or maybe Mason is just preparing for the possibility of there being more, right? Because they could really opt out at any time. But so in other words, I think there are 5, and that's all that's been released publicly.
And those 5 guys, are they around the program? Have they been told to just stay away from the program?
Yeah.
How are they being treated?
So that's a good question. I reached out to most of them for interview. The only one who was willing to interview was the kicker, Orrin Milstein, who interviewed with my deputy sports editor, Betsy Goodfriend. And Orrin had just opted out at the time he spoke to us. So I couldn't really tell you how he's treated now, but he did tell me that the coaching staff was completely cordial. Derek Mason reiterated that, I support whatever they want to do. And if they think this is best for them, so be it.
Say that. He has to, or he'll have a mutiny on his team.
Absolutely. But it is reassuring to hear the player, or at least the one that we've spoken to, say the same thing in return, especially for a transfer, because they could have just said, we don't want you back next year, right?
And the more I think about it, if I'm not playing, if I've chosen not to participate this year, for my own health and for the health of those on the team, I can't be around them anymore.
Right. So I'm not sure if I could tell you they're probably not permitted for practice or walkthroughs. I don't know if they're allowed to use team facilities though, because I do know that in the other conferences that have canceled, I think the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are both doing this. The players can use the facilities to work out, which seems bizarre to me, because if you're canceling the season, it's almost weird. But so I don't know if he's still allowed to use the facilities. And again, my guess is that if anyone else on the team is using it, he's not allowed in there. But maybe when no one else is in there, they're allowed to go in for a lift or a workout or what have you.
Yeah, it's such a weird world right now, trying to navigate through this. And Simon, I appreciate your time and your insight. We're almost finished here. Let's fast forward to the A&M game. That's 5 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Let's assume the world is the axis have not tilted, and we're still rolling forward with the season. We've got a healthy team. We've got no more, we're going in with almost the full roster minus those 5 guys. My first question would be, are you traveling to Texas? Does your staff travel to games?
So let me tell, and this is part of the reason why this whole plan to return to campus doesn't seem all that plausible to me. You've got students like myself, normal students, not a student athlete. The school, not required, but strongly advised and strongly asked that I don't leave Nashville for the duration of the semester. So I'm not allowed to go to Texas A&M, but the players are. I don't know if that makes much sense. So you've got players, student athletes in hopefully all sports. I'm going to hope that women's soccer has a season too, although we don't know yet. You're going to have players traveling all over the place. And I mean, someone's going to have to go to women's soccer might have to go to Gainesville, Florida, which looks like one of the most dangerous places to be in the world right now.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say it's crazy to me that I am. And again, I'm not going to sneak out and go to Texas A&M because my byline is going to be on the internet. It's not going to be a secret that I traveled out of Nashville. So I'm going to be watching from home and writing a column from Nashville. But weirdly enough, I'm not allowed to leave Nashville, and the student athletes are.
And if the game is not televised, how are you going to watch it?
Oh man, if the game is not televised, that'll have to be
I'm throwing worst case scenarios out here, but think about this. Let's say that we've got some kids from mid-state Texas. That's where they're from on the roster. And I don't know if we do or not. And the parents and the family go to the game. Are you
Yeah,
going to keep those ball players from seeing their families post game before they come back to campus?
that's an excellent question, and one that Vanderbilt hasn't even answered. We don't know if Vanderbilt is going to permit any fans. SEC schools are slowly releasing their decisions. Texas A&M's is mind-boggling to me because they said 30%, which may not seem like a lot, but when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you have an 100,000 capacity in Texas A&M at College Station, they're seating 30,000 in the middle of a pandemic, which, like, to me, again, I don't know if that makes sense. You've got conferences around you.
Nothing makes sense.
Not at all. You've got conferences all around you canceling left and right, but we're still having 30,000 people coming to the game.
Well, I'd be really curious, and I know a lot of us who follow the program would be, to find out. This is, I feel like I'm giving you an assignment. I'm not. It's the other guys, the linemen, and the other four who've opted out for the season. I want to know what their experience is right now.
Yeah.
Are they in a dorm? Not a dorm, but are they in a townhome or a condo or an apartment with players who are on the team?
Right.
That's a
good question.
I know that Cody Markell, who's not on the team, he's graduated, is living, I think, with a couple of players off campus. He and I, when I interviewed him a few weeks ago, we really didn't get into that part of it, but I know he's living with some guys who are on the team.
Yeah. And frankly, I think, that those are a lot of the questions that maybe Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt Athletics didn't think through. There was a lot to think through, and little things like that may not have been the first to jump off the page. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered as this season.
I've got about 60 more if you want me to send them to you. If you could get those answered for us real quick.
I'll report back.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, in conclusion, Simon, you're so enthusiastic. You've got so much energy and optimism. I love it. And I know that doing your job, well, I don't know. I'm assuming doing your job, there is that fine line because you're an undergraduate and you want to pull for your school, whatever the endeavors, sports-wise or otherwise. But you have a job to do. I know that. And you do it so excellently, and certainly applaud what you've done, and I'm sure what we'll be reading from you in the upcoming months. But how, if I'm a student, a fellow undergraduate student, and I want to support my sports teams, whether it's women's soccer, lacrosse, you name the sport, and they actually do have a season for that particular sport, how am I able to support my friends? How am I able to support my school?
That's a terrific question. Obviously, we don't know if they're going to be allowed to go to the games, but my number one thing is, if you're not allowed to go to the games, and if some of these sports other than football might not be televised, I advise, there might be a radio broadcast, and if not, there's always going to be Hustler articles. Stay up to date, know who scored, know who won. These are things that are only going to help your fandom and allow you to, when we're allowed to go to games in the future, you'll be able to go and be like, I know who that player is. I know what that person plays, and I know, who's going to win this game. These are all, and I mean, look, students are going to have a lot of time on their hands this semester, being online, being at home, and not really going out much. So I urge all of them to stay up to date with our coverage, and hopefully when things return back to normal, they'll have all the knowledge they need to just show up to a game and support their Commodores.
And forgive me for making a generalization, but if I'm between ages 18 and 22 and I'm on campus, I've got a phone in my hand 90% of the time. 98% of the kids do. You can't tell me differently that they don't read text, or not text, but DMs or tweets or whatever it is. And most of these student athletes have accounts, and I'm sure they read them. And my point here being is, send some encouragement to these guys,
absolutely,
women who are working so hard at their respective sports. Let them know. And even if you don't know them personally, just send them anchor down emojis. That lets them know that you're there and pulling for them from a distance.
Absolutely.
There's not a lot else you can do, right?
Yeah.
Well, Simon, again, thank you for your time and some of your insight. And I know I know you probably felt like your answer has been, well, we don't know. That's a good question. I know you have the same questions that we do and many, many more, but what you have is a direct link that none of us have. And I'm a little envious of what you get to do. I know it's frustrating work at times, but hopefully it's rewarding for you as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I'm happy to be doing it.
Well, remind folks how they can find you, the podcast, the radio, whatever it is you're doing. What are the links? Where can they go?
Yeah, so VanderbiltHustler.com. Our website has all of our articles. And starting this year, we are going to be publishing our podcasts and our television broadcasts to the website after we record them. So conveniently, you can find all of them at VanderbiltHustler.com and follow us to keep up with Vanderbilt sports news at VU Hustler Sports on Twitter. And you'll be able to find not just all of our content, but all of our writers' Twitter handles from there, like myself, Simon Gibbs 26, Justin Hershey, Betsy Goodfriend, etc. We'll all be there. So make sure to keep up with us both on Twitter and on our website.
And guys, I follow almost all of them, and there is a lot of content coming through at different times. So I encourage you, if Twitter is your thing, you'll be plenty busy there. But guys, that'll conclude us for this week. Next week, I've got Brett Hayes, who was a running back during my time period. Brett has got a great story to share with us. He's out of Southern California, and his recruiting story is unbelievable. We'll get into that next week. So I hope you guys will join us next Thursday at 7 p.m. As always, guys, please be patient. Please use common sense. And even if you don't like to wear a mask for yourself, wear it for fellow mankind. And just remember, anchor down.